Hi there, welcome back to Voices and Votes. Mr. Xi Jinping was elected the Chinese president and chairman of the Central Military Commission of the People's Republic of China at the opening session, ongoing session of the 13th National People's Congress. He took a public oath of allegiance to the Constitution in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, which is a first for a Chinese president. Why was oath-taking written into the Constitution? How will consciousness of the Constitution be spread further in China? And what can we expect from the new leadership lineup established in this session? To discuss the day's events, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, Claire Pearson, International Director of DLA Piper Law Firm, and Anna Tangen, our regular contributor. We shall also cross over to Andrew K.P. Leung, an independent China specialist based in Hong Kong. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Well, oath-taking has been long institutionalized and constitutionally enshrined in the West. However, this is the very first time for the Chinese president at this grand ceremony. What do you think of the significance?
Yeah, I think it's something long overdue. As you mentioned, 90 out of some 100 countries that have a constitution have a system like this. When they take office, need to take an oath of office. And I think this is the first time, and that's been waiting for some time. It was actually introduced in 2015, but this time we have a new session of the NPC Congress, and it's the first time that we officially do this. So I think it's a landmark event. It's a very important chapter in Chinese history of our constitution and also our politics.
Claire, are you more curious, excited, or just take it for granted it's high time for China to adopt the same practice politically?
Well, I was very impressed watching events unfold today. There was sort of a new level of gravitas, and I think that's epitomized by the oath-taking. So I think Xi Jinping saying, yes, I'm a great leader, but I'm also accountable, and I'm looking for more transparency in how I manage.
But what about the constitutionality? The constitutional implications of oath-taking. Xi Jinping said a lot of things about this. That's why he was the first to advocate oath-taking to be written into Constitution 3 years ago, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important that you see this in the context of what Xi is trying to do. I mean, he's moving the rules, supervision over the government and the party to be the same, because he's in essence saying that, look, we exist as a government under a rule of law. And we will all pledge to that, and we will all be accountable for that. Now, you notice in his picture, he's also wearing his tag, his name tag. I don't think most people need to recognize him, and it's unusual. In fact, I've never seen any leader actually wear one. And what he's trying to do is portray that he is one of the cadre. He's one of the people who's responsible for government. He's not only somebody who's talking about this, but he's obeying the rules themselves. I mean, there are a number of people who were actually crying during the ceremony, and people thought, oh, they're just trying to, be emotional. And they talked to him afterwards, and what was really important to them is they said, look, this is really the first time in my life that being a party member, that I realized that we are all on the same level, we're working towards the same thing, and we're under the same kind of document.
Let me go to Andrew, who's standing by in Hong Kong. Hi, Andrew. Yeah. It's not something new for mainlanders in their millions to follow presidential inaugural ceremony. However, it is something very interesting for us in the mainland to follow the oath-taking ceremony after the SAR government won the office or was appointed for the new term. Now, what can you tell us about your understanding concerning the oath-taking for people in Hong Kong?
Well, of course, the oath-taking in Hong Kong is recently caused a lot of repercussions in the forms of some of the anti-government pro-democrats and the so-called people advocating Hong Kong self-determination or even independence, failing to take the oath in an appropriate manner. They were disqualified. So the kind of oath-taking is a very sensitive issue in Hong Kong, and fortunately has now died down, because I think that people buy into the conviction that, of course, if you take an oath, it must be taken solemnly and with full intent, and it's not just paying lip service. So it's not a formality. It is a wholehearted commitment to what is the heart and soul of, in the case of Beijing, is China, the heart and soul of China in the Constitution, and in the case of Hong Kong, is the heart of the one country, two systems.
For years in the West, we have the institutions of civil servants in a civil society, and therefore the oath-taking is viewed correctly by Mr. Andrew Long as a matter of commitment, duty, performance, and loyalty to the central authorities. What do you think of such a repeat by Chinese leadership? Because we have a very unique political system here.
Yeah. Well, I think today I do see a big difference between what's typically done here in the U.S., for example, and in China. In the U.S., when an oath is taken, there's a minister. There's a minister ministering this event. So somebody say one sentence, one phrase, and the president will follow this. Today, President Xi recited the whole thing, a whole paragraph, without missing even one word, right? So I'm really impressed about this. I think the significance of this is that, as Lao has pointed out, it testifies to the solemnness, testifies the seriousness of this, the sacredness of this thing. And this is taken under oath. It is something to be very serious. And he's supposed to protect the country, protect the Constitution.
And if you draw a parallel comparison, what impressed the Chinese observers, I'm afraid, is the presence of the family members of the president newly elected, and the stare of millions in front of the television sets, or a big crowd right on the venue of the inaugural ceremony. In particular, and I was impressed by someone who led the oath, for example, the Supreme Judge, right? So what do you think of his role?
Well, the Supreme Court...
And also the use of Bible, on which is the hand of the president.
And this is, I think, is very important that people realize that, China is not a religious country. So his hand is actually on a very special copy of the Constitution. And what it is, it's on very special paper. It's not a very long document. It's more like our, in terms of length, the Declaration of Independence. It's very short. It's to the point, but it talks about the role of government, and it is a changeable. It's a living document. It is not like the U.S. Constitution, where it's almost impossible to change. This is a document that can be changed in order to bring China forward, and that's what we've seen in this last two sessions. Massive changes, an inflection point where China has said, "Look, we're going to do things differently." There have been questions about leadership, the amount of power, but I think this was Xi's answer, to say that, look, I'm accountable just like everyone else in this government.
What about the ceremony implications of a wedding ceremony? Because that's also an issue of oath, pledging allegiance, loyalty. It's a highly ceremonial, ritualistic. I wouldn't use the word of a pompous to characterize the way a wedding ceremony is conducted in the West, in the church in particular. What do you think of that kind of a solemn atmosphere?
Yeah, well, that's all part of this. I mean, we're talking about, the protection of the Constitution, protection of our country, right? So, these are the highest level of political leadership, and definitely in the People's Hall, and definitely there's a sense of, I won't say pompousness, but a sense of a seriousness.
Pomp
sense of
ceremony.
Yeah,
people feel elevated.
Exactly, and this is a historical moment. People are going to look back in 20, 30 years. This is the first time that our leaders pledge allegiance to our Constitution. Even though I agree with this Constitution has gone through several changes, but I still think that there's a fundamental anchoring elements in this Constitution.
Well, no,
for example, based on the fact that this country is a socialist country, and it's going to be led by our governing party, the Chinese Communist Party. So these are the anchoring elements of our Constitution. That's not going to change. So
well, but everyone is put underneath the Constitution, and that's. I mean, in Britain, it's a slightly different things, but people acknowledge that there's a higher authority than any individual within government. It's what keeps the country together. It's the rules. It's the rule of law.
Yeah, and I mean, why do we have these complex ceremonies? Why do we have weddings? Because when people walk in to a church where they get married, they walk in as strangers. They walk out legally bound to each other for life. And I think that's what Xi Jinping is trying to emulate in this ceremony. I mean, taking an oath is very serious. I mean, if you look at Matthew 5, verse 34, you have a whole group of people in Britain, the Quakers, who didn't take oaths because they thought it was a different level. So I think what Xi Jinping is trying to do is marry two types of government. He's trying to bring a sort of Western interest into the ceremony with the Chinese way of running the country and create a union which may be bigger than the both parts.
We've spoken of the importance of having the Bible. We've spoken of the role that the Supreme Judge played. We also talk about the big crowd in front of the inaugural ceremony in the West. What about members of the family? I mean, that's pretty human. Let me cross over to Andrew. Why, on almost all most important occasions, the family members of the presidency would show up? And what message does that deliver to the viewers and the spectators? Andrew?
Well, I think that we should look at not only the question of solemnity and commitment, but what is in the Constitution this time around, and the gravity of the matters included in the Constitution, particularly the amendments. I think the first thing is the shoring up the legitimacy and the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, and that is based on decades of successful progress of China, lifting China from backwardness to the second largest economy in the world, to enabling China to stand up high in the world. And then secondly, what is included in the Constitution this time around is the attainment of the two centenary goals. The first centenary of the founding of the Communist Party, and the second centenary of the founding of the People's Republic of China.
In
so
2049,
these are very
that's the second
great
centenary.
Objectives. Yeah, that's the centenary. So these centenary goals are extremely important, and it points to the direction of the development of China. So that's why the importance, the gravity of the matter requires a solemn commitment to these goals. And that's hence the need for introduction of this oath-taking ceremony.
In fact, this oath-taking ceremony was not the first to have taken place during the administration of President Xi Jinping. He, in fact, led all other members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo and showed up on the site of the first National Congress of the CPC in Shanghai, and that's the admission ceremony. They were facing the party flag. They could recite every and each single word of the lines when you join the Communist Party in front of the flag. What do you think of that ceremonial style?
Yeah, well, that's within the party itself. You know, this is for a state-level event. You know, within the Communist Party, taking an oath has been a tradition. Every time you join, you know, Communist Party member, be a member, you have to, you know, take an oath, and also, you know, various important events you have to take an oath. So this has been a tradition. It's not something new; it's a tradition. But now we are actually extending this tradition in the Communist Party to a state level, and in line with the common practice, the normal practice in a lot of countries around the world. So I think, you know, this is an event that you know, testifies to the fact that China is becoming more internationalized, becoming more normalized on the world stage, and probably also, you know, being more you know, advanced in terms of taking a leadership role in
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there. I mean, there's no such thing as normal. I mean, you tell me what a normal country looks like, and I'll tell you what a normal person looks like. Quite frankly, I think China is just simply developing its own mechanisms to deal with a very complex situation. I mean, the whole idea of everything that China has accomplished, that it still has a centrally planned economy, but it has capitalism. All right, it still is in the West. People say it's not possible. So China is finding its own way, and I don't think it's seeking legitimacy in the eyes of people outside. I think it's legitimacy in the eyes of the people within China.
Well, normal may not be the appropriate word. I think it's more common practice, you know, in many countries. As I said, 90-some countries out of 100, I think 14 countries that do have a constitution that have a practice like this. So I think it's sort of a practice that is being carried out in many countries. That's what I mean.
I'm not a big believer in joining the crowd.
To my knowledge, the UK doesn't have a constitution.
No. Yeah.
What do we have instead?
Well, we have rule of law, we have separation of powers, so we have the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. So
well, what happens when the Prime Minister takes the office?
So, well, there is a lot of pageantry. You know, we really enjoy that. The Prime Minister goes and sees the Queen. So, you know, there's someone who's been around a lot longer than Xi Jinping even. And then it's very interesting. So the Prime Minister is only allowed in to Parliament at a certain point. So before that, they're not allowed in until they're elected, the votes have been counted, and then when officially they're invited in, Black Rod knocks on the door and announces this is a new... So there is a lot of pageantry. And I think what Xi Jinping is trying to do today, he's trying to say, the world is very turbulent, everybody feels unsafe, and by taking an oath, I'm going to show you there's going to be consistency of management, there's going to be ping an, there's going to be peace and stability, there's going to be smoothness, there's going to be consistent management for a sustained period. So everything else in the world might be changing. There might be climate disaster, there might be economic upheaval, there might be Trump firing somebody else every day. But we are going to have consistent management in this country to deliver long-term multinational projects.
Right. Through this oath-taking ceremony, people in China are encouraged to seek shelter and sanctuary in the spirit of a constitution. That's what he says, actually. Now, let's look at the new era with Xi Jinping thoughts characterized by Chinese, conditions. What do you think of the way we're going to commemorate the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up? Now, this we wouldn't call that cabinet reshuffle, but in fact, State Council institutional reform this time around to coincide with the 40th anniversary, and Mr. Xi Jinping was elected president again. What do you think of the messages that the Communist Party of China and the government under the Communist leadership would deliver to the international society after the Taiwan Travel Act was approved, after China was taken as a strategic competitor? What do you think of the turbulent waters we are facing?
Well, I mean, I'm going to agree with Claire here that in terms of style, you have China, which moves like a glacier. You know exactly where it's going to be, and it just goes step by step. Whereas in the United States right now, you have a wildfire. Wherever the wind blows, the fire is going. And I think what you have here is, as we said before, Xi is trying to join the party and the government together and to make them less divisible. It's not purely the party. The government is responsible for serving the people. It's not just the party. And most people in the world think that everybody in the Chinese government is a party member. Far from it. There's 7 million party members in a, almost 40 million person government organization, depending on how you want to measure this at the local level.
We have 80 million party members.
Yes, but they're not all in government. And not everybody in government is part of that. And this was one of the ironies that was happening, is that everyone was blaming the party for any kind of corruption, even though many of the people who were involved in this were not party members. So he's saying that, look, government is government. We're going to make sure that the government is responsive, that we're under a rule of law, and everybody is under the same things. You take an oath, and therefore, if you are brought in for questioning, you're going to be under the same process as any other party member. You are working for the people.
Yeah, and I think in terms of international community, I was talking to a homeless man in Washington, D.C. recently, and I said, what do you think about your government, really? He was an expat who hadn't managed to integrate back into society. And he said, well, I wish, he said that the president should just be kind of the salesman, and we should have a vice president to apply consistent policy. Great suggestion. It was okay 100 years ago for governments to be parochial and concerned with domestic issues. But today, every government, every company is a multinational. The world is flat. Friedeman's correct. And I think Xi Jinping, because he's if you think about it, Deng Xiaoping did Shenzhen, Jiang Zemin did Shanghai, Hu Jintao did Beijing. Xi Jinping is doing West China and all the way to the UK. Idari Lu, it sort of changed the game. So he's saying, I'm going to be around for a while, but don't worry, I'm going to make the country safe. The last 2 times I was leaving central China, one was I was getting the train back from Nanjing, the Manchester bomb went off. the second time I was coming out of Hubei, and there was another incident in Europe. And I remember thinking, China is very safe. My Chinese teacher this morning said to me, I said, what do you think about your president staying on? And she said, well, I knew he was coming in for 7 years before he came in. We know he's staying on, and we don't really mind that much because it gives consistency in a turbulent world. And I think when governments are fundamentally multinational institutions as they are today, that some degree of consistency gives people an assuredness of their own safety when the world
well,
isn't predictable.
individualistically, Claire is right that she has developed a sense of feeling safe in this country, but country-to-country relationship. Taiwan Travel Act has been approved. China is regarded as a threat to the existing presiding power. What do you think of the global implications of having a rising China?
Yeah, well, we are entering into a very tumultuous time, you know, especially with respect to the relationship with the U.S. I think this is a seismic change for the Sino-U.S. relationship. There's a lot of real changes in Washington, D.C. with respect to China. Even some, you know, pro-China policy scholars in the U.S. foreign relations community are changing their mind. And adding on top of this, you know, we have this huge trade surplus problem with the U.S. So I think, you know, on Washington side, they are beginning to take a large weight of actions pointedly at China. And I think the Taiwan Travels Act is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to come. So I think you know, we're really facing a lot of challenges. So at this, you know, really important moment, I think it's extremely important for our government to consolidate its space, to unite the various branches of the government, and you know, prepare for this next challenge. I think especially domestically, we have gone through anti-corruption campaign, and it's a time to also realign our government to make it more efficient. I think our economy is going to be more and more reliant on our domestic consumption, and our government has to be lean. Government has to be supportive of our business community.
Thank you very much. Let me go back to Andrew. The oath-taking ceremony in the Great Hall of the People is said to be the defining moment for the new era under the communist leadership, with Mr. Xi Jinping being the core. What do you think of the new era, so to speak, from the perspective of a resident in Hong Kong? Some pro-secession forces in Taiwan say, hey, Hong Kong's today is the tomorrow of Taiwan, and they don't feel that they have a safe feeling. What do you think of the new realities in Hong Kong after the handover in 1997?
Well, Hong Kong has been doing reasonably well economically, but of course Hong Kong has to reinvent itself. Previously, Hong Kong only at the time of the handover, Hong Kong accounting for something like 20% of China's economy, or equal to 20% of China's economy. But now it's only equal to less than 2%. But on the other hand, Hong Kong is a very, very important lever for China to drive its One Belt One Road, for the internationalization of its renminbi, for the development of its Great Bay Area. And all these initiatives are taking China to a higher plane. And to that extent, Hong Kong would perform a very important role. But the new era is, of course, full of challenges, full of problems, barriers, as well as opportunities. And that's why both domestically and internationally, well, domestically, of course, there are still reform agendas which have to be pushed through. There are vested interests, there's that pushback, hidden corruption. So lots of problems internally, but externally, as highlighted just now, the international environment is increasingly hostile to a rising China, particularly the United States, and also even Europe. They're worried that the rising China is threatening the existing order shaped by Pax Americana, and also the China country which doesn't share some of the values in the West. Now, this is a almost a clash of civilizations, in the sense that there are two powerful nations facing each other with different values and political systems. But I think that also informs the importance of addressing the challenges of the Great Era. And that's why there is a need to rally the whole nation, to rally the Communist Party members as well as the government, to abide by the same rules, to abide by the, as I was saying, the heart and soul of the nation, to realize China's two centenary goals in spite of all these challenges.
Thank you so much. That's Andrew Long, an independent observer in Hong Kong. Anna, Claire, and Gong. What do you think is the most scary challenges among the multiple ones lying ahead for the presidency of Mr. Xi Jinping and his team?
Reaction to what Donald Trump and what is supposedly his team does. I mean, right now, Donald Trump is trying to pick a fight. The Taiwan's Relation Act, he doesn't care one bit about Taiwan. I doubt he would even be able to point to it on a map. But he certainly knows that this is a massive issue. He knew that when he accepted the phone call from Tai Ing-wen. He knows that this is a way of, taking a needle and poking Xi directly. And it's going to be a precursor to probably $60 billion worth of tariffs that he intends to impose under the 301 doctrine, which allows him to do it because of, quote, security reasons. He doesn't have to give reasons. He just says this is about security.
Claire, your interpretation about the most menacing threat that China faces in the new era?
Lost in translation. That's it. Because I really like what you say about clash of civilization or collaboration of civilization. I've just spent 3 weeks in DC. There is economic and political apartheid. It was Chinese New Year. My Chinese friends were in Washington. My US friends were in Washington. When I invited both for breakfast, everybody checked who was coming. It didn't used to be like that. Apartheid situations are not viable for lasting peace. And the more the channels like CGTN try and explain China to people who have not lived here, this is so important. Because Xi Jinping, he's a multilateralist. He's maybe the only globalist. He's the only one who, China first isn't actually his policy. It's America's policy. And I think that Donald Trump, yes, he's got to play a domestic economic card, but I think his long-term economic future would be better served by collaboration rather than direct head-on competition with China. China's got the population. It's the market he needs. He needs to learn Chinese business, not America first dogma.
The core issue of Belt and Road Initiative, I'm afraid, is to have a commonwealth of a shared future. Right. But it seems the U.S. government doesn't see eye to eye with Mr. Xi Jinping, and it seems the two countries have been put into the head-on collision or collision course.
This is actually very sad. We could have entered 2018 as a very good year. Worldwide economy is actually recovering quite strong. In China we got 6.9% growth, much better than previously planned. And U.S. is also coming up pretty strong, close to 3% recovery rate. But just because of Donald Trump, he just wants to start this trade war with everyone, and particularly with China. And with all these political actions, I mean, China, we realize that we have a trade problem with the U.S. and we're open to negotiation. Our government is very keen on helping American companies, corporate America, to increase imports into China.
Studying very hard what to import from the United
States.
That's the next issue. Well, thank you so much for participating in this edition of Dialogue on the Oath-Taking System, the first of its kind by President Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People. He's been elected the president of the PRC once again. I'll see you next time for Voices and Votes, the special program on Liang Hui. Until then, goodbye.